So now did it just start?
We're good.
All right.
Commissioner Delzer.
Here.
Commissioner Erickson.
Here.
Commissioner Walden.
Almost.
Think we waited. Commissioner Walden.
Here.
Commissioner Abraham.
Here.
Mayor Lindsay.
Here. Okay, attached you have the minutes of the September 9th meeting. In that, are there any additions or corrections to the meeting, minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. In front of you, you have the agenda set for tonight. There were just a couple changes in that because we have
You're accommodating my schedule.
David Jensen that has some other things that he has to accomplish tonight, and that we are going to move new business 1 and 2 prior to Mr. Metzger speaking from DGR Engineering, and I've already talked with him, and he's said that that would be okay.
Perfect.
Are there any other adjustments or changes?
I'll move the approval of the agenda as amended.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Okay, under new business number 1, authorize the mayor to sign an indemnity agreement with the Madison Community Hospital. And David, or do you or Chad want to address this just briefly?
I'll lead off, and if I leave anything out, Jack can certainly
Sounds great.
fill in. This is an indemnity agreement. This agreement is really dealing with the situation where we are a permit holder from Lake County.
David, would you mind bringing, thank you, sir.
We're a permit holder from Lake County to accomplish certain work in their right-of-way. And because we're not actually accomplishing that work, other parties are accomplishing that work, we're just simply asking to be indemnified if there's any accidents or damages in the course of that work. That's it in a nutshell, and that's really all we're dealing with.
Okay. Any questions or comments? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Number 2, authorize mayor to sign letter of agreement for officer services, Dakota State University. David, did you want to address that as well?
I'll take this one as well.
Okay.
This is an agreement I believe we already have in place, and I think that we have for some time. It's really just a new agreement due to the expiration of time. So it's basically a contract renewal. And all that this agreement really is it's our agreement to provide good faith efforts to provide officers at DSU sporting events. That's really all it is. I've reviewed the agreement. It's acceptable to me. It's in basically the exact same format as it was before. If you do have any specific questions, Detective Justin Meyer said he can step in and answer them, and I can run and get him if you have any questions.
And I know that he's fine with it, Chief Paulford's fine with it, it's all good, so. And it works out really well for DSU as well as for the officers and for the city, so. So with that, I'll make a motion that we authorize the mayor to sign a letter of agreement for officer services with Dakota State University.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Before us, we have Blair Metzger from DGR Engineering, who has been doing the electric rate study for the city of Madison. So with that, I will turn it over to Blair. And
Okay, thank you. Again, I'm Blair Metzger with DGR Engineering. What I think should be in front of you is a couple pieces of paper. One packet of 8.5 by 11s and one larger two-sided piece of paper that I'll get into later. The 8.5 by 11 packet is the executive summary from the report that I've put together so far on the electric rate study that I've been working on. And I'm gonna use that as a guide to go through this, to try to get some direction to it and hit the high points, if you will. These studies are very detailed, and lots of numbers and things, and I've run back and forth quite a bit with your staff, and there's a lot to it that doesn't show up here, but we can certainly talk about any of that we wish to, but I don't wanna get too far into the weeds, because it takes a lot of time unless we need to, so. I'm using the executive summary as my guide here to guide the discussion. And I'll try to hit the points that we probably need to discuss and get some feedback. My intent here is to present what I have so far, which is my recommendation based on my work. And then what I need from you following this meeting is some feedback, if you wanna see changes and things that we'd like to look further into. So I'm gonna go through the executive summary, and if there's a question on something, just jump in and stop me, and I'll try to answer it. So, the first item there, just a real quick overview of why we do rate studies, what the point of it is. There's really several pieces that we're looking at. The first two are related, and that is the financial picture of the utility. We look at the cash flow estimate and performance of the electric utility over a 5-year period going forward to figure out where rates need to be in order to make the whole thing work financially. So you keep out of trouble, you have enough money around to pay the bills and take care of things and meet obligations that you have. And so that's the first piece. To do that, we look at what we expect the cost to be in the future, what we expect sales will be, and those kinds of things to try to figure out where rates need to be in order to make it work. The second major piece then is the cost of service study. The point of that is to try to allocate to the different rate classes how much of the total cost of the electric utility should be paid by each rate class, so that we're charging an appropriate amount for each class, so that no class subsidizes any other class. So everybody pays their share, but no more. So that's the cost of service piece. And then finally, we come up with actual rates to implement that you can act on and actually put in place. And so those are kind of the three steps: the financial piece, the cost of service piece, and then the rate setting piece. And so that's what we've done. And I'm gonna touch on the high points. Item number 2 on the first page is historical operating results. I really don't intend to go through that in great detail. It's more for information purposes. A couple real quick points to look at there. This is the operating part of this. This is not capital, but if you just look at the operating part of the equation, the biggest single item in there is what we call power supply and transmission. It's mainly power supply costs related to what it costs you to buy the power to serve your customers. You currently buy it from Western Area Power Administration, or WAPA, and Heartland, are the two that provide you the power. And so, in as much as that's a very major piece of this, what happens to those costs really make a big difference to your utility and what you have to do for rates. The second piece that doesn't show up on here is capital projects, and obviously as you do those, it takes cash to do them, and so that's all factored into this as well. We've got a capital improvements plan in place, and there's some expenses that are planned over the next few years that are all integrated in so that you can pay for those as well. If you look at the operating margin, which is an indicator of profit, if you will, we call it profit in a non-profit making entity, but it's the excess of revenue over expenses. And last year, you had a bottom line of a positive 1.3 million. And this current fiscal year, we anticipate the same type of magnitude of a positive operating experience. Again, that's not the full story, because there's a whole bunch of things you need to pay beyond this in terms of cash obligations, such as bond payments and transfer to the general fund and capital improvements and all those things. So, but one important thing is that you want to keep your operating margin positive, and so that's good. You're in good shape there.
And Blair, just for the public, I just want to touch on this right here. This is basically the balance in the account, not the profit made.
This
This
number
is-
there is actually the profit.
Yes, but it's the balance in the account. It's not like we made 1.3 last year. We're going to make another 1.3, and we'll have 2.6 million there.
That is correct.
Yeah,
This
I
is
just want to
correct.
clarify that for the public.
Yes, this is before any other expenses. like that,
Exactly,
which are allowed.
yes.
They're quite-
That's just basically the balance at the end of the year.
Yeah.
Yes.
So how we do this then, and this ties into the next item, which is item 3 there, what I call the rate adjustments in general. How we look at this is we estimate your costs going forward, estimate your sales at current rates, and look what happens to your financial picture. And to speak to one of the comments that the mayor just made, what we need to do is we need to figure out how much money you do want in your bank account at the end of the year. In other words, what we call reserves or cash, your cash balance. And all utilities need to have a certain amount in those balances, just to, for one day or who knows what comes up. We have a little cushion there. We've got some back and forth there, and what's there currently is about $1.9 million, which is a good number for a utility of this size. It's not too much by any means, it's not too little, it's a decent number. And so, as we go forward, that was our target, is to maintain about that amount in unrestricted cash reserves at the end of each year. And we think that's appropriate target, and that's what we used as we did this rate study. And so, when you look at the anticipated average rate increase table there, that shows what we need to do in terms of rate increases on average in order to maintain that. And so what that means is in 2014, we're showing a 7% rate increase on average. That's in total revenues. That's not like customer, we're not talking about customer classes or anything yet. If nothing else changing, but that's the rates right where they were, you have to raise everybody's rate 7% just to stay ahead of things. And part of the driver for that is a couple things. Number one, there's some power supply cost increases that we're looking at down the road a bit that might require, or that will require rate increases if they materialize. But the second piece is that one of the directions we were given is to make sure that we didn't go into a negative cash position in any given year. So in 2014, in order to stay in a position where we weren't burning up cash, we need to raise rates 7%. So that's where that number comes from. Future years, you can see there are fairly modest. Beyond that, they're in the 2 to 3% range, which I would consider to be a cost of living type, a typical inflationary increase. So that doesn't look so bad after we get past this first year. If you were to say to me, we don't really need to make sure that we don't go cash short in any given year, we could lower that increase for next year, but then we'd have to raise ones down the road. So it's a bit of a zero-sum thing, but we could smooth it out if that were your direction. But for now, we've been asked to make it so that we don't go cash negative in any given year. So if all of our numbers materialize and our estimates are reasonable, those are the kind of numbers we're looking at going forward over the next 5 years.
So if we had rate increases, if we had higher rate increases from our sources, it could go above that, that's
If
just.
you go above that, we'd like to think that we're on the very conservative side in all these. In other words, I think that's a safe assumption is that these should be plenty, given what we know today, and probably more than is needed. We think, but, we don't know. I mean, obviously, it's a year-to-year thing, but, when I do these, I try to estimate on the high side for expenses, on the low side for revenues, so that we're conservative. And hopefully it turns out better, is how I approach them, so we don't run into trouble. That's kind of so that's the financial piece in real brief terms, I guess. Again, the goal is to raise enough revenue so that we maintain the 1.9 million unrestricted reserves every year in the bank account. So if we move on then to the next piece of this, now we're gonna talk about actual rates and things that apply to your customer classes and how rates are structured and those kind of things. It gets a little bit more detailed, but it really gets down to the things we need to talk about. And so now that we know what we need for revenues, now we need to figure out how we're going to collect those revenues. And we did a cost of service study, and we've come up with these numbers and these rates that we're proposing. As part of that, we looked at your existing rate classes and have made some recommendations in how to reconstruct those or restructure those so that they're set up a little bit differently, which we believe are important. A lot of these are related to what's happening in the industry today, as well as what's common practice among other utilities and so forth. And so we're proposing some structure changes on the second page there under item number 4 that discusses that. I'll hit the high points. Currently, you've got a rate class called residential, school, and church. And those three items are thrown together in a class. I'm not sure how that happened in the past, but for some reason that was the way it was set up. What we're recommending is that we take the schools out of that and put them on their, within the rate class that they should be in, as far as what other loads of a similar nature are. Put them in on just a regular rate class that would fit their load characteristic. We are leaving the churches in the residential. Churches are somewhat special in that they don't peak at the time the rest of the utility peaks. It's usually on a Sunday, and the utility isn't peaking then, so it really isn't driving all that much cost. So we decided in this case to leave them there for now. We certainly could look at that more if you wish. But at the school, in our opinion, and this ties a little bit also to a different subject, which is the municipal or city loads as well. We believe that they should all pay the regular rate, at least to start with. In other words, they're the same type of load as any other load in town, they should pay the same rate. In the case of the municipal loads or the city loads, if you wish to subsidize them or to subsidize other utilities within the city, you can always do a transfer to that fund, if you wish, from the electric fund, as a way to subsidize that in some way. Those are decisions, or political decisions, if you will, that can be made outside of this, but we believe that they should at least be charged the straight up rate to begin with, so that the incentives for them to conserve and things like that are maintained. So we're making that recommendation. The same thing would go to the school. I'm not sure why that is in place to start with. It's probably from years ago, and if that is still the way it should be done or wants to be done locally, that can be accommodated. But for now, we're leaving the churches in the residential and taking the schools out. The second item we're doing or recommending is that we reconfigure the commercial classes a fair amount. And currently, you've got what's called a light commercial class, which is the smaller customers. Anybody 50 kilowatts and less is in the light commercial. Anybody over 50 kilowatts is in heavy commercial. And what we're doing is we're taking that and making that three classes. They're proposing to do three classes out of that. Small commercial would be your smallest commercial customers, but we're saying anybody that's 25 kilowatts and less would go in that class. So those are your smallest businesses. Then we're gonna propose a class for large commercial, which is anybody from 25 kilowatts up to 250. And then finally, we're gonna propose what we call the large power industrial class, which is anybody over 250 kilowatts. And there aren't that many of those, there's 12 or 13 of those, so those are just your biggest customers that go in that class. And so that's a bit of a change from what you currently do. We think it's appropriate, especially lowering the demand limit down to 25. That's more industry standard anymore. Most utilities around here are about at that level, so that's a common practice, so we're recommending you do that. And then I mentioned earlier the municipal load thing, putting all city loads in the class they belong, at least to start with, and then from there you can decide what to do transfer-wise if you wish to subsidize them in some way. So, if you do those and accept those recommendations, then section number 5, which is on page 3, it shows the actual rates that I'm proposing for each of those rate classes. We'll talk about in a minute what that means for each class, but one of the things I want to point out for the top two classes, which are residential and church and small commercial. If you look at the rate components, the far right column, you'll see an energy charge and a customer charge. Customer charge is a flat amount that every customer pays irrespective of usage. It's intended to recover costs of having a front office and sending a bill and having catering and those kind of things. Energy charge is where all the other costs of serving the customer are put. And that will, the amount that generates will vary by customer based on their usage. So obviously the more you use, the higher that number will be generated. The point I want to make here is that currently you have what's called a declining block rate structure. And it's kind of a relic of the 70s actually. It's been around for a long time, but most utilities have gotten rid of that or at least significantly squeezed it. You've got three blocks, the first of which is a very high cost, very small block. And really that's kind of a relic of even beyond or before the 70s, where you were trying to capture those fixed costs that I talked about a minute ago having to do with customer service and metering. You're trying to capture that from everybody by billing a really high amount, the first amount of energy that got used, so that everybody paid that no matter how small they were. Well, that's been replaced by the customer charge, and that's what we're proposing to do. You actually have a customer charge in addition to that, so you're kind of hitting those people twice, if you will. So we're suggesting that that go away. But the other piece of this is, you've got another step at 1,000 kilowatt hours, and you have a lower upper block. So in other words, as you use more and more energy, your average cost goes down because you're charging less for that higher usage. And again, that was the relic of the 70s when people built big power plants and needed to get them loaded up, and so they wanted to send an incentive to someone to use more energy, so you lower it, you go higher, and that's the way to do it. And unfortunately, we're in kind of the total opposite time today. We're in a time where we want to send a signal to conserve energy, not use energy, and so it's a relic of past times. We're suggesting as a step, the appropriate step is to make it a flat rate. In other words, it's the same cost for the first kilowatt hour as the last one, which will send the signal that people don't use more than you need. It also is more common, that's what people are doing. There's actually some people talking about inclining block rates that really send a signal of not using energy. We're not gonna even talk about that, but we think we should at least try to cut that down and make it a flat rate for everybody so that the right signal gets sent. And we'll talk about what that means, because it does have a big impact on larger users, is the real kicker, so. Anyway, that's the table with the rates. There's really no reason to talk about the details there unless you wish to. We should move in though into the next thing, which is what this all means to people. And that's, I start getting into that in page 4, Roman numeral 4 of the executive summary. I talked a minute ago about the flat rate, and I told you what that all means. I'll get into that in more detail when we start looking at what it means specifically. The second piece that I'm proposing is that we implement this, what I call a demand ratchet or demand floor for your large commercial customers and your large power customers. And what that is it's a way of recovering cost from those utility, or from those customers that are seasonal in nature. In other words, those that use a lot in one month but not in other months, and those kinds of things. And you have spent a whole bunch of money putting a transformer there, and somehow you need to recover that. Even though they don't use it all year round, you somehow have to be able to recover that cost. And so the way to do that is to put a 50% demand ratchet in there, so they always pay at least half of their peak demand, which helps you recover those costs. And again, that's a pretty common practice in the utility world, that people do that. It's not a great thing for those people who use electricity only for a couple months out of the year, but it really is appropriate, because that's, somehow you have to recover those costs. If you put that big transformer there, you have to somehow recover that. So that's what we're proposing to do. But it will have an impact on certain customers. So, before I get into the specifics, the last thing here is the projected revenues that we expect to receive. On the last page of the executive summary, I've got a table there that shows what each rate class will generate in terms of revenues if you accept my proposed rates and things turn out like I expect them to. You can see there how that shakes out. Residential class is your largest class in terms of dollars, almost twice as big as any other class. But then the other ones fall in there as well, ending up with a total of about 9.3 or $9.4 million of revenue, if we implement the rates that I'm proposing, which is what we need in order to make it all work financially. So that's the long and the short of it, and that's what we're proposing to do so far anyway, is to how we generate the revenues we need. Now, I think what we should do here is talk about what it means to the rate classes, because this is where it really gets down to the decision-making and how we want to end up here, because this all looks really easy so far, but until you see what it means, the rate classes, it's probably difficult to make a determination as to whether or not you want to do this or do something different. I suppose before I do that, I should open up for questions if there's anything. I'm going through this pretty quick, but everything so far.
Just real quick on the schools, You're talking private, parochial, DSU, K-12.
Okay, DSU is a separate animal altogether.
Okay.
They really don't come into play in this because they've got their own contract and we're treating them just like they're already.
Separate. Okay,
I think the school, I don't know how the, I guess I'm not sure, I'm not exactly sure how the schools are treated parochial versus public. No.
Residential.
Yeah, so they're all residential.
so they were part of that group then, and then they would slide out? It's
They,
like-
they are residential, they would stay in residential, except for the high school complex.
Mhm.
That is so big, that will fall into the industrial class.
Got it,
Yeah, the larger ones will, that's what the public schools will be.
okay.
So the big piece of paper that I have there, it's two-sided. What I'm attempting to show here is by rate class, what this all means. It'll take some explanation here, so I'll try to do that, and then we can respond to questions. The front page is the one that looks like this with all the numbers on it. This is a table that shows the comparison of old rates versus new rates for the residential and church class on the left, and then small commercial on the right. The way the table is set up, it's based on usage. So it's kilowatt hours, which is how you bill based on. And if you enter in the table from the left and look at a given amount of usage, you can trace across there to see what the current bill is, and then compare it to what the proposed bill would be under the rates that I currently have developed. And then see what that means in terms of cents per kilowatt hour and what percent increase we're talking and what dollar increase we're talking per month. So for example, on residential, the average residential customer uses 943 kilowatt hours a month, and so that on your table should be in bold. If you look at, that's the average customer on the average month. Currently, their bill's $106.28. If you go over a couple columns, you would see that under my proposed rates, they would pay $115.90, which a couple columns over is a 9.1% rate increase, or about $9.62 a month. So that's what the average residential customer would see. Unfortunately, average is just that. There aren't that many average people. I mean, some are gonna be close to that, but there's a lot of people that are gonna vary from average. And so, if you look at that table, if you go down in usage toward the low end, you'll see that there's a few of those that actually see a small increase in terms, or small decrease rather, in terms of dollars. That's because we're getting rid of that really high first block that I talked about earlier. And for the most part, those folks are gonna see just a small increase. But if we go up in the table, and this is where it gets kinda tricky, if we go up in the table, especially to your heavier residential users, they're going to see a very large increase. And the reason for that is because of that declining block rate going away. If you accept my recommendation and like it, we'll go to a flat rate, which means that they lose that lower final block. And so if you're, once you get over 1,000 kilowatt hours, you'll see it start increasing pretty rapidly. And that's because of that declining block feature going away. I will point out, as I mentioned earlier, if we do nothing, you would need to see a rate increase of 7%. So you kind of need to factor that in. So in essence, if you just left the rates where they were, but raised them 7% to take care of our revenue problem, the average customer on this rate wouldn't see much of a difference. It's 9% versus 7%, roughly the same. But again, those with higher usage would see a big increase. The very bottom of that table is really not applicable to residential customers, because there's probably hardly anybody that would use anything close to that. But there probably are some churches that would use that. And so those would be seeing a major increase. As you can see, they're currently on residential, they stay in residential, but because of the declining block going away, they would see a major increase if we go with a flat rate. So let me talk about the other classes for a minute. You can kind of hold that to the side, I'm sure we'll have to discuss that some as we go forward here, but we go to the small commercial, it's a similar story, although there are more customers that would see a slight decrease than is in the residential class, and that's just kind of how the numbers work out. The difference though, again, being, or I should say, the similarity to the rate, to the residential rate, is that the small commercial customer currently also has a declining block feature. I think theirs is 2,000 kilowatt hours is where their break happens. And so if you look at people that use more than 2,000, they're going to again see a bigger increase for the bottom of that usage table there. If you take that flat rate, put the flat rate in and take the declining block rate away. So that class is similar in some regards to the residential, same type of deal. The average customer uses 1,160. You can see there that that customer actually would see a slight decrease in their cost for that usage level. On the back page is a bit more information. This is a little confusing. Try to explain it as best I can. What I've done for all your larger customers, including all the large commercial and your large power customers, is I've actually gone through and for those customers, I've looked at what it means specifically using their actual usage, because they are being charged demand as well as energy. And what that means then is depending how efficient they use it, has a big impact on their cost. And so I've gone through and done that with a little more detail, but what I've shown here, instead of giving you reams of paper, I've shown just the overall total for each of those two rate classes. And so the top section, above the heavy line there is the large power industrial class. If you go way over to the right, in that table that's shown there, there's a number that shows a minus 7.7%. And if we implement the rates that I currently have shown here, it shows that that rate class ought to see a 7.7% decrease in total. That's what the class shows now. It's gonna vary within the class. Some are gonna see a little bit more than that of a decrease. Some will actually see an increase. It all depends on their efficiency of usage. But in essence, the long and the short of it is that rate class today is paying more than they should. It's according to my numbers, according to my stuff. And so what we're seeing there is that they ought to be seeing a decrease if we set these rates based on cost of service. If you drop down then to the last one, which is the large commercial class, again, those are the people between 25 and 250 kilowatts, they would see on average about a 13.6% increase in their cost. I will make one comment. A large part of that increase comes from city loads, or municipal loads. So it's not as bad to our private customers as it may look here. They're not gonna see that kind of increase. A lot of that's gonna come from the fact that we're getting rid of the special rate that the municipal loads get and putting them on regular rate. So it's not quite as bad as it looks, but nonetheless, my study shows that they should be paying more than they currently are. That rate class.
And just for the public, and that, what he's referring to is the water treatment plant pays their own electric bill, the sewer treatment plant pays their own electric bill, the shop pays its own electric bill. So, when you're referring to those, at least that way the public knows.
Yeah, yes.
So Fred, turn the lights out when you leave, huh?
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you.
Save us some money.
Again, as I mentioned earlier, if the city wishes to then make a subsidy to the other funds from electric fund, that can be done outside of this, but I'm proposing that we start here with this and put them on the same rate so that they get the same signals that everybody else gets, and hopefully that's a way to save energy and those kind of things as well, so. So as far as the regular rate study, there's a couple other topics that I want to touch on, but I can do that after we discuss this. I'd like to take questions or get some feedback on this. With the goal of getting direction going forward, what I will do is, in the next few days, I will transmit the draft rate study report, which covers the whole thing and has a whole bunch of pages with a lot of stuff. But if you want to read at your leisure, you can, which may help understand these numbers better. And so after that, and after you have whatever discussions you want to have internally, if you want to recommend some changes for me to plug in, I can do that and then make a final report, final presentation down the road. So think that's where we're at. Jeff, is that right? Or am I- That's kind of what the process is, I believe. We can still make some changes here, but this isn't, final, so. I guess I'll open it up to questions or discussion or.
Can you, in a nutshell, sure as possible, and I'm sure that's probably not fair, but can you give us some reasons why there's a differentiation in the classes, particularly related to the energy costs? So what's the difference in providing power to a residential customer compared to a small commercial?
Okay, yes. There's really two pieces to that make a difference, and one of which is the contribution of those classes to the city's peak, that they need to pay Wappa and Harlan for what I call demand or peak power. That's set at a half hour every month, so whatever half hour in the month is your highest load, that's how you get billed from those entities. And so, because the rate classes contribute to that peak in different ways, the cost ought to be different. In other words, the small commercial, for example, contributes more to that peak than residential does. Just to use an example, I can't recall how that works without looking at my numbers to know exactly if I'm using the right example, but to the extent that one class drives that peak more, they should pay more of that cost. And we have some information that we take into account and use as we try to figure out how that all works, based on when the peaks occur. If the peak occurs 5 o'clock, or let's say 6 o'clock in the evening, well, we know that's residential, people coming home, turning on air conditioners or electric heat, depending on when it is. As compared to a peak that happens at 10 in the morning, which is more commercial driven than residential driven. And so we take those things into account and try to allocate that, and to the extent they're different, those rate classes need to pay different. The second piece is the cost to actually serve those customers physically. In other words, we have to have substations, we have to have power lines, transformers that go along with serving customers. And to the extent that it costs more to serve a commercial customer, they need to pay more because of the cost to actually physically serve them with electricity. So those are the two main things that come into play. And we try to, in our cost of service study, figure that all out and allocate them appropriately so that each customer pays their share and we're not subsidized. And so I guess those are the two main things that drive the difference in cost. The actual cost of electrons coming from your power providers is the same. It's just these other costs relating to peak, capacity, and relating to infrastructure that vary.
Okay.
Hopefully that was concise enough.
So the alternative to that would be to upgrade our system all the way to charge for peak loads. If we didn't average this out or assign costs, what we'd have to do is totally upgrade our system and send a nasty bill in the middle of July, just like we get when we hit our peaks. That costs us money at that moment in time. We get a big bill that says you've hit a new peak, and we would have to be able to assign that to each consumer that peaked at that particular time as well. So the fact that we don't have the infrastructure to manage that today, we're assigning costs to those
Yep.
and who.
Yep. What you're really talking about is time of use, so the rates,
Yeah.
where people that are really truly using the energy on that peak get charged what it really costs, and that would be nasty for those that are using it. And I think that utility industry is gonna go there someday, when the infrastructure that we have in place for metering gets there, we'll get there. And that's gonna be a big change for people, but today, we try to figure this out and use averages and allocations and estimates and all that to try to assign it at least to a rate class to get them to pay what we think they're contributing, and that's the best we can do today, but that's correct, yeah. We could have perfect information, we'd actually assign it directly to them and they pay their share.
And we'd all sit in the heat
Yeah,
and be
exactly.
glad to do it instead of paying that
It'd be
extra
too
bill.
much, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The one, and this is more for Jen. The 7% increase, how does that relate to the current money that we have budgeted
What we
in?
needed.
Okay, so we have that, I knew that you were aware of this coming, so we're not,
Yeah, we worked all that out to come up with
Okay.
the 7%. We put the dollar amount that we needed.
okay,
came up with
okay.
7%.
And then the other thing in that maybe that I'll have you touch on just a little bit more, as we talked about, you know, the people that are not getting a demand charge now, but using over 25 kW. The peak demand may be that we have to have the infrastructure there so that they can have a high demand for 2 hours in a day, and then it drops off. But the demand charge is there to cover that heavier wiring, the heavier, the transformer, and, you know, things that are needed for maybe that 2-hour period that that small business is there, and then their power usage drops off, you know, for maybe the next 10 to 12 hours. Very much the same as someone who comes on with a peak demand, and that peak demand stays there for 8 hours a day, and that, you know, or 10 hours a day, and then drops off. So in this proposal, there are proposed that there will be some businesses in Madison that will receive a demand charge, which haven't in the past.
Yeah, there's a couple topics there, one of which is we're lowering that line to 25 from 50, so that people that are currently between there don't get charged as much. They're on just an energy only rate. So that will come into play. But the real key to this whole thing is what you mentioned about how they use energy and how efficiently they use it. And that's what we call the load factor. Those with good load factors, in other words, people that turn things on and leave them on, will be rewarded, if you will. And those that are poor will be penalized, if you will. I don't want to use harsh terms there, but that's kind of how it's going to work out. And it needs to be that way to send the right signal, because, as you said, you put a big transformer there, or they're peaking on your peak, they're causing a lot of cost, and so they somehow have to pay that. And so by using a demand and energy rate structure that we're proposing here, that will help collect that appropriately. And that's how the industry does it. That's nothing unique here, but we're just extending it to more people, which is gonna send the signal to more people to use it efficiently. And so I think we're doing the right thing by doing that. And that's why we propose it, so.
And we have mechanisms in place. Denny does consulting to help these, you know, if somebody sees a big demand charge come in, he can help them, give them some ideas on how they can maybe, you know, I think he's got lots of ideas, but little things like maybe staggering their workforce just a little bit to have their big machines not turn on all at 8:01, maybe little things like that that can help these demand charges.
Yeah.
So it's not like we just say, you're on your own. We do want to help. We want that demand to go down too, or those peaks at least. So it's not something that
So it levels off.
yeah, it's better for everybody if we can help them minimize their costs as well, so.
And I think we do a pretty good job when, on those peak summer days, you know, sending out emails to citizens and to DSU and to the plants and say, hey, listen, you know, we're hitting a peak load here, so help us out. And we like to think that they help us, but at the same time, it's good to know Denny's out there helping as well, so. Blair, I have one other question here on this, on the proposed large power industrial class, is where I'm looking at with the, you know, -7% there.
Yes.
Now, how does that relate, and I guess I'm going a little bit more into the economic development world, but is that something that, like, our LAIC can utilize? Because I know, you know, they're constantly talking to companies coming into town. And the one thing I don't want to do is I don't want to rate us out of the possibility of having companies come in, and not just necessarily your big manufacturing companies per se, but also the 10, 15, you know, it's a technology world. A lot of companies, Vermilion's, they hiring 100 developers in a building. Obviously, a lot of electricity to keep all their computers and things running. Where does this rate study fit in with that type of economic development?
How do these rates compare, you mean, or does this?
Compare, and does this keep Madison competitive with other cities?
I think that's hard to know because it depends on the load characteristics. But what I think we can say here is that this provides the right incentives for them to use energy efficiently, and it also sets it where it should be so that you're not overcharging those types of customers. If you're looking at economic development, you wanna make sure that that rate for your largest customers is as competitive as you can be.
Mhm.
Assuming
Yeah,
that makes
yeah.
sense. And so, by doing this, that helps you get it where it should be. And you're only charging them what they should pay, and you're not subsidizing some other class by overcharging your large customers. And so that should help in economic development.
Okay.
I think that's important because, you know, at first, you know, you look at that 7% down, you think, well, we're throwing everybody a bone here, that's, you know, but that's not the point. The point is, we're looking at the rate structure for everybody and who should be paying. Not, and I wanted to really commend Blair, you know, what we do with it as a commission with his information is our decision. But I think he has done what he's been asked to do, and that's look at it in a very antiseptic, preferential
Prejudicial.
manner, or either way, preferential or prejudicial manner. But to look at it and as he summarized, to figure out who's supposed to be paying. So this isn't a question of, are we lowering it to make Madison more attractive for industrial customers? That's not the point. The point is that they're supposed to be paying their fair share of our cost of power. And I think that's what he's saying. Is that okay?
That's absolutely correct.
And at the same time, to keep us competitive in the way in doing that is, again, coming back to, it's a fair
Right.
shake for everybody, and so I appreciate that as well.
Do you know, I know there was talk prior to this study of moving the schools, so this wasn't a
Okay.
big change. But do you know, at that point, it was to do the right thing, because they should be probably moved to one of these other classes just for their own cost structure. Is that still the case? Is it a benefit for the school to be moved from the current class they're in?
Give me a second here, I can look and see once what, if I can find them quickly, I don't know if I can.
I know it's gonna change quite a bit as they go online with all their new systems. It's probably not gonna be, it's gonna be apples and oranges from one year to the next with the new renovations, but.
You know.
Last page,
Last page of which one?
the industrial.
Industrial. Oh, there we go. Yeah, what this shows, and, now, am I correct in that there's gonna be a new high school, is that?
Well, they
They
renovated it, so they
renovated
used
it and added to
geothermal
it.
and some other, you know.
So this is based on usage, historical usage.
Yeah,
so I
that's
don't
all
know
we
how
can
that-
go off of, yeah.
This shows about a 15% increase
Okay.
in both the elementary and the high school. So, I mean, and the reason for that is because when they're on the residential rate, they're getting the benefit of that really low
The discount.
second tier, if you will, the cheap tier for most of their energy, because they use, you know, the line is 1,000, and they're using, you know, hundreds of thousands, so
Yeah.
essentially all at that low block.
Okay.
There's no incentive for them to be efficient.
Not really. This will, you know, this will give them an incentive to do that, so.
Like I said, I don't think it's gonna be apples and oranges from
By the time
last
it's
year to
said and
this year,
done.
just because of the changes they've made, so.
Yeah.
Did you want me to talk about the load management credit issue on here?
Yes. I think this
If we're done with this, I don't want to. One of the things that I looked at, is that you had asked me to look at, there are two things, one of which was the coincident demand billing, which I kind of sort of swerved into earlier when I answered the question about if you have metering infrastructure available, if you have one, every customer, you could actually do coincident billing where you just directly apply what it was really costing you at the time of your peak to that customer. You're not quite there yet. I think it, someday we'll get there. I'm familiar with some communities that have that on a limited basis. Volga, for example, with the bean plant, they have the rates that I developed for them set up so that they pass that through directly, so we know exactly what it costs, but then again, that's a huge load, it's bigger than the rest of town, so it's, I mean, it's a special case. But someday we'll get there, and my recommendation is going to be is that you put metering in place for your largest customers already, been done half a year ago or so. And I would suggest we gather some data on that over the next few months, and then once you have a year's worth of data, we look at this again and look at that rate class and maybe start with a pilot program for them. Start there and see how that works, if it does any good or not, and then if it does, you can roll it out to other classes, but, so that's one topic. The other topic, the larger of the two is the load management credit issue, and the question is, are the credits appropriate in the amount that they are currently at? The whole discussion there is deserving of a whole study on its own right, I mean, that's a lot of work to really get that exact, and really is well beyond this rate study, but I did look at a couple things, one of which was the credits that you pay out, the amount versus what you're estimating in savings. You, every month, your operating people look at that and estimate, because they know at peak time who's under control, how many water heaters, how many air conditioners, et cetera. And they make an estimate as to what that saving in demand, and they can multiply that by the demand charge to get the savings and so forth, and do that for a year. It looks like currently you're giving out about a third of your savings in credits. Credits are $270,000 or something like that in savings, in demand charge savings, and you're giving out about 90,000 in credits, using round numbers. So if you look at it on that basis, it looks a little bit like you could increase those credits to some extent and still be saving money, if you will. I also look at it in terms of what are others doing, what are other neighboring utilities doing, how do you look compared to them, and really you look pretty close to what they're doing. There's a couple neighboring ones, I think Sioux Valley Energy has a $6 water heater credit, you're at $375, if I remember the numbers right there. So you're a little light on that one. The air conditioner credit, it looks like it's right in there between some of the others, so. In general, I would say you're not far off, but there's some room to move up if you wish to do that. The discussion is, in a perfect world, you'd have it so that it's high enough to consent people to do it, but not too high that you're giving away all the goodies to those people. You're trying to get this for the good of the whole cause, so to speak. So there's probably some room to move there. You want to set it so that you don't have people taking them out and getting off the program. Whether or not you want to set it high enough to get new people in is kind of a whole nother discussion. I mean, you have to get quite a bit higher to do that. You have to weigh whether or not it's worth having cold water or a warm house, that kind of thing, compared to what you're saving and all that stuff. So my suggestion is going to be there's probably some room to move there if you wish to do that. You could increase them some without getting too carried away and still be okay. I'll have a whole dissertation of that in my report. Give me a short version of my ideas, so, I don't know, anything else I should say on that, is that, that's pretty well.
I like the short version.
Okay. Talk about it. So, that's all I've got, I guess. I can answer questions, or out of here, if you'd like to do. Missed anything?
I think we're good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really.
I just have a couple things, not necessarily directly, but while you're here. Can we post this on the website so our citizens can, I strongly urge our citizens to take a look at this, look at their bill, match it up with this, because what I don't want to happen is however many weeks down the road, if we choose to do this, we put this in place, and then everybody starts running with their hair on fire because they didn't take the time. I know that the media will do a good job letting people know this, but if they don't take the time to come look at their rate, and it goes up, like some of these could, a residential rate could go up by 30–40%, and they aren't aware of what's happening around them, there's gonna be pain and discomfort. And this is the right time. We're in the middle of a decision-making process, and too many times we sit up here and make decisions without any input at all. And I know it's not always fun getting calls all time, at night, but this is a pretty big step for us. So we need the citizens to be aware of what's happening here. To me, it on the surface looks like the right thing to do, but the citizens have to be aware of what's coming, because what we don't want to do is surprise them, because then we'll have a room 2 weeks later after we voted it in, or a month later after they get their bill, full of people upset because they didn't know this was coming. Well, this is everybody's kind of notice that, take a look and see what your bill's gonna do. I think it's pretty easy to look it up. I mean, they got all the numbers right here, so. The other thing is, I guess this is kind of directed back at Jeff. From my point of view, I'd like to see, I know it's kind of a shot in the dark to start with, but I know when was it, 1970? The last time we did the management,
Yeah, 1982.
1982. So we must have done a heck of a job back then if it's still somewhat current, or everybody else is as far behind as we are on updating it. But I'd still like to see a recommendation come on that. Primarily, I'm interested in what it costs us to manage the system, so we make sure we got that factored in there, so we're not, if we did add a bunch of people to it, it's gonna take some work by, our electrical department to hook them up and to monitor the costs and all that, so. I do think we need to make some adjustments on that. I think now's the right time, particularly for these people who, that it's a way to, well, not offset everything, but if you're a high user residential, one, you probably need to look at why you're a high user residential. If you have an old house that hasn't been, needs storm windows or insulation or whatever it is to mitigate that, and then we could also help offset that by using the peak demand offsets.
I'd just comment as well, Blair's met several times with our electric advisory committee, and several of you around here have been on those meetings. And there's some recommendations coming from the advisory committee. I think they'll be communicating those to the commission as well. But as a citizens group, to, give at least some other input on some of these decisions. I made the comment a couple times when this was first revealed. There was some rather shocked faces, and when the numbers were presented, I said, well, if you don't want to know the answer, don't ask the question. And if we want to know the answer, periodically we need to ask the question, and that's what we did. What we do with the information, that's something we'll have to decide, but we asked the question, and now we have some of the answers. Now we need to decide what we're going to do with it. But knowledge is good. Quoting Emil Faber.
I think an important thing to really realize is this is the biggest thing we do in the city. It doesn't matter. I mean, it's the biggest expense we have. And we still, we have a system of how we're billed, and we have a system of how we bill, and we're 30 years behind. I mean, it's gonna be a while before we can connect those two, because they're not, it's not an even one-to-one. When we hit peaks, we don't automatically bill everybody for our increased costs, and that one moment at a time, we can have a 30,000, 50,000, what, you guys know off the top of your head, if we hit a new peak, what it costs us in that 1 second?
Well, it's
Well,
actually,
in half hour, but it could
Well,
easily be.
24 times a day possible.
But I mean, if we hit that one,
$25 times every 1,000, so it could easily be $30,000.
$30,000 that we have no mechanism to pass along, so. And that's just because our technology hasn't caught up to it. So we're trying to find the most effective way to manage two separate systems together and be fair with everybody on how we're billing it, and not get caught with our pants down that, where the city has a much bigger bill than what we could ever collect. So that's one of the reasons we need to keep monitoring this. It's not a $20,000 bill, or not even a $100,000 bill. It's $8 million or $9 million that we have to deal with. So we need to keep watching this closely and keeping up on it. It's not something we can just bury our head in the sand and hope someday it all works out. So I think it's important that we look at this, and while all these numbers aren't always what we want to see, if we bury our head in the sand, we can bankrupt the city in a very short period of time by not dealing with this effectively and making sure we're doing the right thing.
The other thing that I think is a big change in that a number of people are probably not going to be noticing is the demand charge on those businesses that use between 25 kW and 50 kW. They currently are not receiving a demand charge. And so for some of them, and that, especially those that have a high demand for a short period of time and then a low demand for the rest of the day, having a demand charge, even if you have a lower rate for the rest of the day, the demand charge is the amount that's necessary for you to have the equipment and the power and the lines and that there, to use that for that short period. Some of them may be really surprised, in this process here too. So I know we can't mention any particular businesses in that, but it's something that I think that the businesses need to take a look at and say, what do we use? What is our peak demand for the month, and is it going to affect us? And then too, try to, get some questions answered before we step forward and make a final decision.
Is that something readily available on their bill, or is that something they would need to call in and get some help with? If a commercial needed to get an idea of what this is gonna do to them. I assume we went through and that we have a line item for them, so we kinda know. Is that something they can call into or should we?
Call in, Scott, and we can, if they got all that information under the year, we can download a month's worth.
Okay,
That'll show them every half hour for that month.
okay. Where do we want them to call for that question?
Actually, there would be 107 accounts in that category.
100, Jeff, would you come to the speaker in that so that people at home can hear that? Because I know the questions that I've got is, have people speak into the microphone because they can't understand them.
Well, in the new classification that Blair is proposing, there would be 107, about 107 accounts in there. Blair has gone through, based on information received from Jen's office, got a lot of historical data, and he applied what they're currently paying based on, or what they paid in the last 12 months, actually 2012, and then plugged in the new rates. So it would be very simple for those people to just call someone, Jen.
Passing the buck there, I see that one.
And she would have a list of each individual account and what it would do to them.
Okay.
And again, as Blair said, some, and not to be alarming to all of them, because a number of them will see a rate decrease. And I
It's
think
how you use the power during the day that's gonna make the biggest difference. And and that's, like I said, if you turn the power on and it stays on for 8 to 10 hours, you may not notice much difference in your bill at all. But if you turn yours on and you run it for 2 hours, and then your power goes down to where you just have lighting the rest of the day, well, you're gonna pay on that peak demand, plus you're gonna be paying for the utility or the electricity you use for the rest of the day. So, it's something that most people are not even, familiar with. That's the tricky part. But we do want the public to know that if you have a small business and that, it's best for you to look and check into what is your demand and what does a demand charge do, even though on that particular category, you may pay less per kilowatt than the residential rate for the kilowatts used. But because you're also paying a demand for the maximum number you used, that can affect your bill both positively and negatively.
Exactly. And while Jen will have a list of what the effect would be, to actually talk about lowering the demand and what is demand, that type of thing, I think Dennis would probably be better, or good, not better, but they both be
Agreed.
good.
Sure.
Dennis deals with it more.
Well, and Dennis can download some data that would
Right.
kind of help him. And again, if he's on the consulting hat, he can walk into those small businesses and say, hey, listen, yeah, this pop machine you got in the back here or something, or you got the old refrigerator for drinks for the employees, you know what? Get the energy efficient fridge, and that's gonna help. I mean, it could be something as small as that. Most of it probably isn't, but, so I think that's where Dennis could be a big help for a lot of them. And this is something, like Commissioner Delzer was talking, as citizens, we don't wake up in the morning and say, geez, how am I gonna save electricity today? We may wake up and say, yeah, you know what, I'm not gonna make 3 trips to the grocery store, I'm just gonna make 1 today and save some money that way. And you really just don't think about it, and I think this is a good time for people to take some time, put some thought into this and see what you can do.
And it also may be a time in that too, when they take a look at, we have the energy assistance program that's out there, to help upgrade on some of those things and that, that are heavy users.
Well, thank you, guys. I know that there's a lot of work and time and effort into it, so appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Just having to work with Jeff is hard enough work, right?
Yeah, well, he's actually done a very good job of getting his information I need, so. I gotta say that nice.
Okay, number 2, acknowledge August building permit report. The August building permit report is here, and are there any questions, comments?
Make a motion to acknowledge the August building permit report.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Back under new business, resolution number 2013-27. Direct the preparation, filling, and setting of a public hearing on the assessment roll for sidewalk improvement project 2012-2. Chad, do you want to make any mention or comments on this?
I can talk about some of this, and then, Jen may have some things to add as well. This is for the sidewalk work that was accomplished by our contractor after August 1st of 2012 primarily. The contractor wasn't done with that, and we didn't have the tabulations in order and prepared by to meet all the hearing requirements and notice requirements to get that accomplished by November 1st of last year. So it would hit the proper time frame for this to go over to the county courthouse and such. So this is the completion of that process. That construction process and the assessments and the sidewalk repairs, et cetera. And then, as you'll note, associated with not only this resolution, but the other 2 following this on the agenda is the assessment roll that I filed with Jen in the finance office to itemize and lay out the details of the costs. This is as I understand, this is the necessary steps per state law to allow this to go through this process of being assessed back to the property essentially. And I don't know, I missed probably a lot, Jen.
This is step 1 of several steps.
Right.
This is the
To
first
get it,
resolution, right, we'll follow it with a notice, publish a notice of hearing that will be held early October. There'll be a mailing to residents between now and then. After the date of hearing, we will also approve an additional resolution to adopt and levy. There'll be another notice that goes out to the property owners, and finally, by about early November, we'll have this wrapped up. So this is for the first of many documents you will see regarding all 3 of these assessments.
And this is for work that has been completed?
Correct.
Yes. Okay.
And we have a policy in place, I believe, for payments before it hits the assessment, isn't that correct?
If you so choose, we'll have to have it, if you would please, as part of each motion.
Do we,
The 20% that we're,
Did we do
the
that?
admin fee that I gave
Yes.
to.
do we do that every year?
We have since we've been on the commission.
Okay, that's what I thought.
I don't know
Seems
how-
to be the norm, correct, Chad?
The policy, I don't have it in front of me, as I understand it, is that there's a 20%?
Last time it was 20%.
Administrative fee placed on it for, among other things, what you see, this and the work behind this. And last time this was done, which was in 2011, the commission did waive that if these payments were made, prior to.
Before the date of hearing.
Prior to the date of
That was my next question. I thought it was before the date of hearing. They had to,
Before
they
the
had,
date of hearing.
That's correct.
October 7th, the day?
Right.
Okay.
they would know what they were gonna get, and after that, then we go through the
Because
process.
of the notice that we'll send out
Yep.
very soon, yes, they'll have a very short window to come in and pay that without that 20% admin fee.
Okay. So if it's paid before October
7th.
7th,
Correct.
7th, it would be like getting a 20% discount.
Well, you just don't get the 20%
No,
add-on.
you don't.
Well,
you don't
that's
get
what I'm
It's not a
saying.
discount, you just don't pay the add-on, it's
Well,
the administrative fees.
Right, right. But it is.
It's 20% less.
Yes. 20% less than if it's gonna be assessed.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yes.
And I think last time it was in the motion, whatever the commission wishes are to waive it or not, because the policy says it should be applied, but the motion should probably include if you want to waive it, it seems.
Please.
I'll move the passage of Resolution 2013-27 for directed preparation and filing and setting a public hearing on assessment rules for sidewalk improvement project 2012-2, and also pursuant to our standard policy, if they do make payment prior to the hearing date, they will not be assessed the 20%, the 20% administrative cost.
But that's payment in full, correct?
That's
Correct.
payment in full.
Payment in full.
Payment in full.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Mr. Mayor, this is for 2012, and I know we got a couple other ones, but do we have work for this year then that?
There'll be more coming.
There'll be more of these
Finance
coming
officer
then?
sat on these
Okay.
way longer than the engineer would have liked, so that's the time frame
Okay.
difference there, okay?
Okay.
So yes,
Just-
about the time we get these wrapped up, you're gonna see a whole new batch likely
Okay.
from
From
20.
this year.
Okay?
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
coming this year.
So we get a two
Yes.
for it.
It'll probably be within this calendar year, but we'll still miss the deadline.
Well, I was gonna say, it's not gonna make the
Yeah.
tax rolls. but-
Correct.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
Okay, moving on, number 4. Resolution 2013-28. Again,
We need
direct
to vote.
Did we
preparation.
vote?
We need to vote on that.
Was there a vote?
Oh,
There was not a vote,
there was not a vote.
sorry.
All right, on 2013-27, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Resolution 2013-28, direct the preparation, filing, and setting of public hearing on the assessment roll for sidewalk improvement project 2012-4.
Same thing, essentially,
Yep.
just another group. I make a motion to approve resolution 2013-28 with the.
2012-4.
2012-4.
Oh, nope, you're right. I'm sorry.
1328.
I stand corrected.
2013-28 with the same provisions for the waiving of the administration fee if paid by October 7th.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Resolution 2013-29, direct the preparation, filing, and setting of a public hearing on the sidewalk repair improvement project 2012-5.
I'll move the approval of resolution number 2013-29. And also regarding sidewalk repair improvement for 2012-5, and that the administrative fee be waived if the full amount is paid prior to the hearing date.
Second.
Oh, did you second it?
Yep.
I didn't hear it. Thank you. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Approve purchase of a 6-way folding V-plow. And that information in that was attached in your packet. And Fred, would you like to address this?
Actually, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to address number 7, which is the approval purchase of the John Deere 544K loader first,
Okay,
if we could.
okay.
Don't you want to buy the plow if you don't have the loader?
It's hard to push without that loader. So it's gonna come down.
Okay, we'll move to number 7.
All right, sir. This is the loader we were talking about during budget time. We sat back and looked at the equipment needs of the department as far as year-round use and snow removal specifically. In the past, we've actually rented a motor grader that's averaged about $10,000 a year as far as a cost, a rental cost for us. with the motor grader being used probably 2 times, possibly 3 during the course of a 5 or 6 month period, it seems to be more cost effective to use our funds to purchase a loader. And item number 6, which will be the plow to go with that, and be able to actually use that loader year-round instead of just for a 5 or 6 month season as far as snow removal. The loader's a more versatile piece of equipment. It'd be used a lot more than what that motor grader would be. It'd just sit in the barn and wait till it snows again. So I think it's a more cost-effective way to do business, and that's why we asked for approval to purchase that loader. This will be purchased off of the Minnesota State bid. Paperwork is with that as far as the cost savings and stuff. I think it's about a $250,000 loader we can get for about $145,000.
If I may, I have sent this to my auditors today, just because this is a little bit unique beast. We've only done one of these off of a different state bid ever that I remember. It's a new option that we have. So I'm sending it to my auditor, basically to be audited before we order the piece of equipment, rather than later on when we find out we didn't have all the paperwork in order.
Is there a
Okay.
timeline on getting that back from them?
I returned a call to him at 5:20. He needed to do a little bit additional research, so I can't imagine it'll be more than a day or 2.
Okay.
Deal?
Yeah, that's fine, because I've got about a 5 to 6 week lead time on getting that in hand, so I'd like to get that before we end up
But
needing
again,
it.
because this was a little bit unique, I wanted to make sure that we had all the documents in place that we needed.
Brad, we talked about this during budget. I know, I don't want to replow the whole field, but, pardon the pun, but are we, you're satisfied, and I don't know equipment, Nick might, is this a piece of equipment that's gonna do the same as that secondary? You know, I'm so used to seeing those plows going down tandem when they're doing their conga deal. Is this gonna work the same way?
Yeah, we'll still run the plows in tandem. I know there was a question from staff that we addressed earlier. It was, what if we get ice buildup? Well, in the reality of the whole thing is we only use the one motor grader to actually, peel the ice off. Especially by the time we get everything sanded for everybody, you've loosened all that up. So it will be used, for the most part, in the same function as far as, tandem down the road, get everything plowed up. Plus, this loader actually will be able to get into more spots when we actually use the motor grader.
Is,
Also in addition though, but where you see the graders is only on the highway.
Yep.
This will be able to go into residential, and when the highway's done plowing, it will continue to work. It won't go back to the shop
Right.
like the grader does. So-
Because that's normally the way it works. Once they get everything windrowed up on the highway, and then down, they take off and they'll park that and use everything else to get everything windrowed up.
now, is this in addition to, or do we have something else that we're gonna replace?
No, what we're
In addition
replacing
to-
is the lease of the second motor grader.
Right, I just wanna clarify that.
Right,
Yeah, I just wanna clarify that.
right.
So this is an additional piece of equipment and that can be used year-round,
Yes, sir.
rather than just a motor grader that's used, or leased for 3 months and maybe used twice for the 18 to 20,000 lease rental.
We usually pick up that grader in October, and we turn it back into them probably the end of March. So we're looking at a 5, sometimes 6 month duration of actually having that motor grader. Just depends on the availability of the grader too. We wait too long like I did last year. We got the last of the motor graders coming out of North Dakota, so.
Wasn't the prettiest.
It wasn't pretty, and it actually broke on us the first time out.
We had the insurance though.
Yeah, my gut was telling me buy the insurance, and it worked out pretty good, because that was a pretty expensive.
You broke the table.
Yeah, it did. We actually broke the table on that thing. Caught a manhole and just snapped it, so.
As I recall, Fred, this is the same price that we were talking about at budget time, isn't it?
Actually, budget price during budget time is $160,000. This is $145,000.
Okay.
So
Well,
it actually
that's much
came
better.
in cheaper, saved us a little bit of money. There's one other additional item though that I would like. There's a $5,000 JBR, I can't even say it right. Yeah, JRB coupler that this particular equipment comes with, but I would like to get approval also to just spend the extra $5,000 to get an additional coupler. We're gonna use that on another motor grader, not motor grader, loader that we have. We're trying to get some get all our couplers the same, so that we don't have downtime, we don't have to park this piece of equipment, go get this piece of equipment, go hook up to this additional piece of equipment to go do a particular job. If we get all those unified or uniform, and as far as the couplers go, it's just drop one, pick another piece up and go, instead of swapping equipment back and forth. That would not be on this bid request, it's just.
I was gonna say, you know,
No,
when
it's
you
not
do a
gonna
bid
be on there.
request, you have to stay with exactly what is
Yep.
there, and you can't add or detract from it,
Not from
and
this.
so.
You're just
that's-
telling us that's something you wanna do.
Yes.
Okay, and so,
So
and that's
make sure
something
you're
we,
aware of that.
that's something we could do in a different meeting, you know, okay? Because, yeah, we've had some questions, you know, not questions on the piece of equipment, but the questions to make sure Minnesota does things just a wee bit different than South Dakota does, and we want to make sure that we get approval so that we don't get hit blindsided in the far end later on. So,
And to be purchased with depreciation funds?
Yes.
Okay, would you make that, if you so choose, to
Part of the
approve this
motion.
as part of your motion for me?
I would make a motion to authorize or approve the purchase of the John Deere 544K loader off of the Minnesota contract for $145,853 from the depreciation reserve.
and Nick, I'd also
You
like
wanna
you to
make that
add to that, providing that we can get the state satisfied with the paperwork, since this is a Minnesota, South Dakota bid.
Just contingent on the audit approval.
Yeah.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Number 6.
Number 6, we'll go back to number 6 now. Six-way folding V-plow, this would be used to actually move the snow, take the place of the blade on the motor grader, so this would be used with the loader. And so this was actually, this will be a Sioux Falls purchase, it doesn't have to come off a contract bid price or any of that, so it's under the bid price.
And the other thing on this and that, it would make it much more versatile than what the motor grader is, because the motor grader, in that you don't have that ability. You can only just turn and twist the blade and send it to the right or to the left, and here it would allow you to, you know, be a little more specific,
Right.
so.
I'll
Same
make-
funding?
Same funding.
Depreciation.
Depreciation.
I'll make a motion to approve the purchase of the six-way folding V-plow for $18,791 and to be purchased from the depreciation fund.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
I would just comment that Fred probably would be wise to wait till he gets confirmation on the loader before he buys the plow.
Yeah, I don't think there's gonna be a hiccup with it. This is.
No, I think he'll be
There's
fine.
other municipalities in South Dakota that's already used this process, and it's worked well for them over the past couple of years, so.
It's a government
I-
contract.
It's
Yeah.
the same thing we did when we bought the zipper off the Texas contract.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Minnesota actually put this together, they've worked it very well, where they've got a lot of equipment and every option you can imagine on that state bid, and it's just, they let this every year, and it's, a lot of folks actually
Have been
utilizing
off
that.
it.
It's specifically for, you know, governmental municipalities, so I don't anticipate any problems that the auditor may have with this, but we will wait a day and find out what you find out, Jim.
Thank you.
Attached, you have bills for approval, bills for ratification. Any questions, comments?
I'll move the approval of the bills.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. You also have some attached personnel adjustments.
Make a motion, we approve the personnel as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Seeing no other announcements and other business, Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Okay, thank you, everyone.
You got Jeff's email on the electric committee proposal.
Yeah, and I want to break it down so we could.
Basically what he's doing is, I didn't want a copy of it, or I did, but I didn't bring it.
Gail,
But
when are more
it
books
will-
gonna come in?
Here, for some of these people. Just ordered another.
Okay.
Just do it over.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Anytime I came
fantastic.
down to get one,
Concern
so.
with that is I know it principle, it sounds fantastic.
Came down last
Can we
night,
do it?
we're done
Can
and
we do
gone
it in
by
the
time I
office
got there.
without it costing us more money?
I don't know.